everyone, welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is Brewing with Underwhelming Commanders, episode 7. And we are starting out this week with Blind Seer, 2 blue, human wizard 3/3. You can pay 1 and a blue, target spell or permanent becomes the color of your choice until end of turn. And if I remember the lore correctly, I'm not a huge lore guy, but I'm pretty sure this is Urza in disguise. The idea here being that he's sort of pretending to be this blind seer, but this is actually Urza. So has a really interesting ability, obviously changing the color of spells or permanents to the color of your choice. So first things first, I want to go over some of the things that actually don't work in this deck. I checked out EDH Rec to see some of the things they're doing there, and I was surprised to see some of the cards that I actually didn't think worked in the deck. So Chill, for example, 1 and a blue enchantment. Red spells cost 2 more to cast. So this doesn't really work with Blind Seer. I mean, it could work in the deck, but with Blind Seer, if your opponent casts a red spell, you can't target it until it's already on the stack, and then they've already cast it. So that's not going to work here. Insight is another one. I mean, it's a great card. I recommended it in my 10 cards videos. Whenever an opponent casts a green spell, draw a card. So again, they've already cast the spell by the time you target it. So this is not going to trigger if you make it green after it's already been cast. Great card anyway. You could just throw it in the deck. Wrath of Merit Lage is another one. 3 blue enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, tap all red creatures, and red creatures don't untap during their controller's untap step. So again, I mean, unless you're putting a Painter's Servant in this deck, which I would, Painter's Servant would definitely be a great inclusion in this deck, because then you can just turn everything one color and it would work with these effects. This doesn't work with Blind Seer though. If we're talking about Blind Seer, at no point can you turn someone's creature into a red creature on their untap step. You can't do anything on someone's untap step. You know, if you do it at the end of a turn, it's going to shut off at the end of turn. That ability goes away at the end of turn. And on their untap step, everything just untaps instantly before you have any chance to react and make their creature red. So again, that's another card that I don't think works good in the deck. However, a card that does work good in the deck is a card like Douse, for example. So 2 and a blue enchantment. Pay 1 and a blue, counter target red spell. So the reason this works is because now my opponent casts a spell and I can turn that spell red while it's on the stack, and then I can pay 1 and a blue and counter it. So now this becomes just 1 and a blue from my Blind Seer and 1 and a blue from my Douse. I can counter any spell. So that's a fantastic fit in the deck. Hibernation is a fantastic fit in the deck, right? You're just going to want to look for cards that deal with certain colors. 2 and a blue instant, return all green permanents to owner's hand. This is really just a great spell in Commander in general, I think, given the popularity of green. The most important part here is its permanence. So now you can turn any permanent your opponent has into a green permanent and it'll get bounced, including their lands. You can even turn your opponent's lands into green permanents and they'll get bounced by this. So that's a fantastic inclusion in the deck. Luan Cephalid Empress is another one. 3 and a blue. When Luan Cephalid Empress enters the battlefield, return all blue creatures your opponents control to their owner's hand. So this isn't going to hurt you at all. And your opponents can't cast blue creature spells. So again, the second part there isn't going to do anything, because once your opponent casts a creature spell, it's already been cast, and if you make it blue, it doesn't do anything. We're already past the point of no return, essentially. The first part does, though. The first part, you can just turn a bunch of your opponent's creatures blue, then play this and bounce them all to their owner's hand. It's just a good card anyway. Like these cards like Luan and Insight and Hibernation are going to be good cards just because blue is a popular color, green is a popular color, so you can just put them in the deck even if they don't necessarily work fantastically with Blind Seer. I already said Painter's Servant would be a great fit in this deck because, again, you can now turn all of your opponent's stuff blue, and now that Luan second ability will work. Douse, maybe we want to turn everything red, so now Douse is just 2 mana, counter anyone's spells, so that's going to be great for any of these effects. You can just pick which color works best for certain situations. Shifting Sky is an enchantment that does something similar. 2 and a blue enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a color and all non-land permanents are the chosen color. So it's not as good as Painter's Servant. Again, it's not going to work with the casting of spells, but it does work with permanents. Distorting Lens is a one-shot. Just tap target permanent, becomes the color of your choice until end of turn. You always want to have backups for your commander's abilities in your decks if you can. Hearthstone's going to be great because now our commander's ability is only going to cost just the 1 blue. We don't have to worry about the colorless part. And of course, you can just throw anything in here that grants protection. Master of Waves or any of the Sword series. Anything that gives protection from a certain color. They're just great cards anyway, but now we can turn that creature that might block our creature into that certain color. So now it can't be blocked. So that always works great. Any protection from anything is going to work good in this deck. And then some of the big bangers that we're going to want to close out the game with. Will Breaker is fantastic in this deck. 3 blue, human wizard, 2/3. Whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes the target of a spell or ability you control, you gain control of that creature as long as you control Will Breaker. So now we don't care about the color changing aspect anymore. Now this just becomes 2 mana, we gain control of any creature on the board, right? We just use our commander's ability, pay 1 and a blue, and any creature we target, who cares about the color changing part? We're just going to gain control of it. Dismiss into Dream and Cowardice also work great this way. Again, we don't care about the color changing part anymore. Dismiss into Dream is just 6 and a blue enchantment, and every time those creatures become the target of a spell or ability, they have to sacrifice it. Cowardice, 3 blue enchantment, that whenever those creatures become the target of a spell or ability, they'll have to bounce it back to their hand. So those are both going to be fantastic in the deck. And I really like King Crab in this deck. 4 blue, Crab. It's a 4/5 and has pay 1 and a blue, put target green creature on top of its owner's library. I know this doesn't seem like much, and it's a 6 mana creature. That's a lot. But this is a way to close out the game, in my opinion, because once we get down to 1 opponent, this can just be, I turn one of my opponent's creatures into a green creature with my commander, and then I put it on top of their library, and then that's what they draw the next turn. This can really lock someone out of the game, so I like it that way. But moving on, and next up is Isao Enlightened Bushi. I'm going to say Isao, even though I'm sure someone in the comments is going to tell me that's wrong. And Isao is 2 and a green human samurai. 2/1. This spell can't be countered. So right away, that's always fantastic. I love when our commander can't be countered. Has Bushido 2, which for whoever doesn't know, means that whenever this creature blocks or becomes blocked, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So that's pretty good. And it has pay 2, regenerate target samurai. So right away, you look at that card and you go, okay, well, you want a samurai tribal deck because you're regenerating target samurai. But that doesn't really work because for the longest time, Isao was the only green samurai. It got printed in, of course, Champions of Kamigawa block, where all the samurai were originally printed, and he was the only green one. There was no others. Until now, Jade Avenger got printed in Modern Horizons 2, 1 in a green, Frog Samurai, 2/2. Looks like a character that should be in maybe Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or something, and has Bushido 2. So now we actually have another green samurai that we can chuck in this deck, so that's kind of fun. There's actually a lot of really interesting creature types from Modern Horizons 2. There's actually a clue mirror, which is interesting, so now you can sacrifice that clue if you have like a Tireless Tracker in play. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, you can put a counter on it. So now if you sacrifice your Parcel Mirror, you get to put a counter on your Tireless Tracker, or you can sacrifice it to a Tamio's Journal, so that's kind of interesting. But I digress. We have another green samurai that we can throw in this deck, so I think that's kind of fun. We also can obviously throw changelings in here too. I got Chameleon Colossus here and Masked Vandal. Just 2 really great cards, but because they're changelings, we can use our commander's ability to regenerate them. And as I've said many times on my channel, I really think regenerate is an undervalued ability in Commander. But I think the most important part here is that our commander is a samurai. This is just pay 2 mana, regenerate our commander, which is great. And our commander can't be countered, and our commander has Bushido 2. So for me, this is more of a Voltron deck. I'm playing more of a mono-green Voltron deck. And I think if we're in mono-green doesn't do artifacts well, does enchantments really well. So I want to do an aura deck. For me, this is a mono-green, sort of Voltron, sort of enchantment aura deck. And when I started doing some research on this deck, I found a lot of creatures in mono green that want to be having auras on them. Aura Gnarlid and Bramble Elemental, for example. Aura Gnarlid, 2 and a green beast, 2/2. Creatures with power less than Aura Gnarlid's power can't block it, and it gets +1/+1 for each aura on the battlefield. Not just the ones on it, but all the auras on the battlefield. Bramble Elemental, 3 green Elemental, 4/4. when an aura becomes attached to it, you create 2 1/1 green Saproling creature tokens. Druid of Horns is a 3 and a green human druid 2/3. Whenever you cast an aura spell that targets Druid of Horns, create a 3/3 green beast creature token. Fugitive Druid, 3 and a green human druid. Whenever Fugitive Druid becomes the target of an aura spell, draw a card. So really some fantastic creatures that also are going to fit the theme of a mono green deck that wants to be casting lots of auras. Of course, we also have Argothian Enchantress and a lot of the other enchantresses. And we also have Seasons of Growth, 1 and a green enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1, that's great. And also, whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. So now all these auras we're casting are going to draw us cards. I also really like Gargos Vicious Watcher in the deck. 3 green, green, green Hydra, 8/7 with Vigilance. Hydra spells you cast cost 4 less to cast. So that's not going to be super relevant. However, it does apply to the changelings. We have a few changelings in this deck and they're going to cost less, so that's good. What I really like about it is whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell, Gargos Vicious Watcher fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. That's our spells too. So now all of these auras that we're going to be targeting our creatures with, every time we do it, we can get Gargos to fight one of our opponent's creatures, and he's pretty big and mean, so he's going to be killing a lot of creatures that way. I think he's a fantastic fit in the deck. Also, we're going to be putting auras on our stuff. I think he's a great creature that we can throw auras on as well. He's looking pretty nice with a Rancor on him, I think. Since we're doing enchantments, why don't we do Artifact Hate as well? I got Collector Ophi in the deck, and I got Creeping Corrosion as well. I think it's a nice little added bonus if we hate on our opponent's artifacts in a deck where we don't really have any. And then, of course, we're going to want lots of auras, and there's tons. Alpha Authority is an interesting one. 1 and a green enchant creature. Enchanted creature is hexproof and can't be blocked by more than 1 creature, so that's great in any Voltron deck. It's going to be a good one we want to put on our commander. That combined with Regenerate is going to make it really difficult to get him off the table. And it's surprising how little auras there are that grant hexproof. There's really not hardly any at all. Ancestral Mask and Alpha Status are both going to be fantastic. Ancestral Mask is going to give +2/+2 for each enchantment on the battlefield. That's going to make our commander or any of our other creatures enormous. And Alpha Status, enchanted creature gets +2/+2 for each other creature on the battlefield that shares a creature type with it. I put that one in there specifically for the changelings because changelings share creature types with everybody. So if we put it on one of our changelings, it's going to get +2/+2 for each other creature in play. So it's going to be massive. Bear Umbra, stuff like that's going to be great. Blanchwood Armor is a really fantastic one, giving +1/+1 for each forest we control. So there really is a ton of auras in this deck that we can use. I have 22 auras in this deck. There's a bunch. There's some really good ones. And as you can probably tell by the way I'm talking, I'm actually looking at a deck list here. I actually did make this deck just like I did with the Minichi Fevered Dream situation where Isao was in the lead for quite a bit after the first couple of days. And so I sort of started brewing these ideas and it just happens, you know, I start coming up with these ideas and I keep adding and adding and adding. And next thing you know, I'm almost at a deck. So I basically just finished it off and said to heck with it. And I actually made the deck list. So again, another bonus deck list for you guys, even though this is the second place commander in the poll, I actually did make a deck list for it. So that is in the description below if you want to make off with it and start playing mono green samurai / aura Voltron. But the actual winner this time was Gyrus, Waker of Corpses. And this one didn't surprise me at all. I mean, it surprises me that this is not a more popular commander. I thought for sure this was going to be a popular commander when it first came out. Only has about 370 decks on EDH Rec. X, black, red, green, Hydra, 0/0. And Gyrus, Waker of Corpses, enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it. When Gyrus, Waker of Corpses attacks, you may exile target creature card with lesser power from your graveyard. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that card that's tapped and attacking. Exile the token at the end of combat. So a lot happening here. Obviously, there's a couple different ways you can go with this. And the first way to go is, okay, well, it enters with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the mana spent to cast it. And it has an X, so I can just dump a ton of mana in here, get a huge creature, and then when I attack, I can just get huge creatures out of my graveyard. Yeah, you can do that. And there are a couple of bigger creatures in this deck that I think just work in the deck anyway that you can end up sneaking out of the graveyard. but I actually made a Gyrus deck before, way back in the day. Honestly, I have no idea why I took it apart because it was a really fun, interesting deck that I won a lot of games with. And for me, I'm going with the bottom scenario because I don't want to get stuck, okay? Grenzo Dungeon Warden is another commander that I would build in the exact same way. Very similar commander where you can play it with more counters on it and its ability cares about its power. For me, if I'm building a Grenzo deck, I'm not putting any creatures in that deck with power greater than 2 because I just want to cast my commander for the cheapest amount every single time. And Gyrus, the same thing. I don't want to wait till I have a ton of mana. I want to play my commander immediately and immediately start getting to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay 3 mana, just the black, the red, and the green. I'm never going to pay the X. Obviously, if we have to recast our commander and you add commander tax on, then we're going to get more +1/+1 counters. That's fine. For me, I just want to cast my commander right away. I don't want to wait till I have a ton of mana. So that means it's going to enter the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. So it's going to be a 3/3, and when it attacks, we're exiling a creature with lesser power, so power 2 or less. So for me, I want as many creatures as I can with power 2 or less in this deck that I can get out of my graveyard. And basically, I want the double use, right? I want that ETB, for example, like an Eternal Witness or a Ravenous Chupacabra. Those creatures are going to come into play. I get the value off of them. Then they die, go to my graveyard. I attack with my commander, and I can get them back. They're going to be tapped and attacking, which is okay, but more so I want that ETB because I'm going to be exiling them at the end of combat anyway. And that's a really tricky sort of situation because Ashnod's Altar doesn't really work here, right? If I sacrifice my token before it goes away, okay, but now I have 2 colorless mana on my end of combat step. What am I going to do with that, right? It's going to disappear out of my mana pool before I get to my second main phase, so I won't be able to use it. So that stuff doesn't really work. So you can put sacrifice effects in here. Evolutionary Leap is a great one where you can just do it whenever and get the value out of it. You just got to be careful because it has to be an effect that you can get value out of at the end of your combat step. So ETB creatures are going to be really fantastic in this deck because I can get that value out of them. Yeah, they're attacking. Our opponents will probably block them and they'll die, but I've already destroyed a creature or I've already gotten something out of my graveyard with Eternal Witness. So that works. Also, sacrificing creatures, Sakura Tribe Elder or Caustic Caterpillar are going to be fantastic in this deck because, again, we can put them in play, sacrifice them. Maybe they're even better because now we can get them into our graveyard, attack with our Gyrus, get them back, and then immediately sack them again. I mean, maybe we can get in for damage. You can attack someone with your Sakura Tribe Elder that you actually can smoke for 1 damage. But ideally, we just want to sacrifice it to that effect. As Caustic Caterpillar, we can sacrifice and destroy an artifact and enchantment. So creatures like that are going to be great in the deck. I really like creatures with Echo in this deck. So a card like Avalanche Riders or Bone Shredder, they're going to come into play. We're going to get that effect. Then on our upkeep, we have to pay the Echo cost or sacrifice them. Okay, we're not going to pay. We let them go to the graveyard, and then we immediately attack with our Gyrus, and we can get that effect again. And again, it has an ETB effect, so if it dies in combat, who cares? Deranged Hermit and Gitu Slinger are 2 more that we can get out of our graveyard. They have that low power, right? Again, all these creatures I've named are 2 power or less, so we can get them. That's the bottom for Gyrus. The bottom for Gyrus is 3 power, so that means any creature with power 2 or less, we're guaranteed to be able to get out of our graveyard. Both of these are going to fit that. Deranged Hermit's going to give us a bunch of squirrel tokens. Gitu Slinger is going to do 2 damage to any target. Sting Scourger and Yavimaya Granger are fantastic ones. Sting Scourger, really interesting card that I've used in a few decks. Only costs 2 mana, is going to come into play and bounce a creature. You don't see that a lot in red. Bouncing creatures in red is very rare. That's usually a blue ability. And what's even more unusual is Echo cost 4, 3 in a red. So you're probably not going to be likely to pay this, but that's fine. In this deck, that works great. We'll pay 2 mana, bounce a creature, it goes to the graveyard, and then we'll attack on our next turn and get it out of our graveyard, or whenever, right? Any of these creatures that are going to go to our graveyard, like our Yavimaya Granger, it's going to come into play. We get that basic land. We don't pay the Echo, it dies. We can just get it back whenever we want. It's just going to sit in our graveyard, and at any time we want any of those abilities again, we can reuse them when it's convenient for us. Exploit also works great in this deck. I got Minister of Pain here and Vulturous Aven. Minister of Pain is going to come into play, and if it exploits a creature, your opponent's creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn, and Vulturous Aven, if it exploits a creature, you're going to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. So again, just great value there, and the great thing about this is they can exploit themselves. So you can play them originally, they exploit themselves, then go to the graveyard, and then we can get them back out with Gyrus. You can exploit any of your other creatures with them, because we want to be sacrificing creatures in this deck as well, right? Maybe we want to put our Eternal Witness in our graveyard so we can reuse it, so we exploit our Eternal Witness and then get it back when we attack with Gyrus. Evoke is another ability that works great in this deck. I got Shriekmaw. Foundation Breaker is a fantastic one. Recently came out in Modern Horizons 2. We can pay 1 and a green, evoke it, destroy an artifact or enchantment. It's got that 2 power, so now we can immediately get it out of our graveyard if we want. Shriekmaw is one that has 3 power. It's just great in this deck, though. You got to put it in there anyway, even though it has the 3 power. We can't get this out of our graveyard immediately with Gyrus, but if we cast it later, I mean, I imagine it's going to die at some point, and then when we recast it, we'll now have paid 5 mana because of the commander tax, and it's going to be a 5/5. So that's a great thing about Gyrus, how, okay, you want to kill my commander? Great. Next time it comes into play, it's just going to be even bigger. So it's almost like your opponents are doing you a favor. I mean, they're not, but you don't want them to know that. We got to get stuff in our graveyard, and we're also attacking a lot. So Azra Oddsmaker and Key to the City are both perfect fits in this deck. Azra Oddsmaker, at the beginning of combat on our turn, we can discard a card. Okay, we want to do that. If we do, we choose a creature. When that creature deals combat damage this turn, we draw 2 cards. So we're going to choose our commander more than likely, because we're going to be attacking an opponent that probably isn't going to be able to block. And if they can, Key to the City is the way to go. 2 mana artifact, and you tap it and discard a card. Up to 1 target creature can't be blocked this turn. Just a perfect fit in this deck. We want to discard that card in our graveyard. We discard maybe our Deranged Hermit that we can then immediately get back out of our graveyard when we attack with Gyrus. And now Gyrus is unblockable, so we don't have to worry about anyone blocking and killing it. A great card to discard is Anger. That's definitely a card we want in this deck, because we want our commander to have haste. We want as much haste enablers in this deck as we can, because our commander has an attack trigger and we want to be using it right away. We don't have to wait until our next turn. So Anger is going to give our commander haste, and also we have lots of discard effects that we can throw it into our graveyard. Speaking of discard effects, Survival of the Fittest is absolutely perfect in this deck. Okay, I know it's a really expensive card, but I would be remiss if I didn't give it a mention, and I did put it in the deck list. Obviously, you can just take it out and replace it with something else if you want, but it's such a perfect fit in this deck because we want to be discarding creature cards and we want to be looking for creature cards. So it's an absolute perfect fit in the deck. Fauna Shaman is the cheaper version of this. Obviously not nearly as good. It's a 1 and a green elf shaman, and we can pay 1 green and tap, discard a creature card, search your library for a creature card, and put it in your hand, then shuffle. So it has that same ability, except of course it has summoning sickness, so we can't use it right away unless we have that haste enabler. Also, we can only use it once, whereas Survival of the Fittest, you can just go nuts with it and use it like 5 times in 1 turn if you have the green mana. You know, I mean, I have Fauna Shaman in the deck as well. They both work. If you can't afford that Survival of the Fittest, just maybe replace it with something else for now. Felden of the Third Path also works fantastically in this deck because we're filling our graveyard with lots of creatures that we can get ETB effects with, right? You can pay 2 and a red and tap, create a token that's a copy of target creature card in your graveyard, except that it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the end step. It's doing a very similar thing to what our commander is doing, except the added bonus here is it's just creating a copy of it. It's not actually exiling it. So any of the creatures that we want to reuse with our Gyrus, we can still use them with our Felden first and then use them with our Gyrus after. We definitely want to be putting stuff in our graveyard, so Auric Lore Mage is going to be fantastic in this deck, obviously, and Violent Tumor is going to be extra good because it is a creature that is doing exactly what we want to be doing in the deck in both different ways. So 2 black Zombie Warlock 2/2 with Death Touch. When Violent Tumor enters the battlefield, search your library for a card and put that card in your graveyard. That's exactly what we want. We put a card in our graveyard that we want to then cheat into play. Also, it's a creature that's a 2/2 that has an ETB. So when this goes to the graveyard, now we can get it back with our Gyrus and reuse that ability again. I think Dolmen Gate is going to be a great fit in this deck. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to attacking creatures you control. That's definitely something we want. We want to be attacking with our Gyrus a lot so that he's not going to be just running into giant creatures and dying. And then, of course, Doubling Season is going to be a great fit in this deck as well. Another kind of expensive card, but it's just a great fit. Doubling up those tokens is always going to be great. Any token doubling effect is going to be good in this deck. I didn't put Parallel Lives in. I wanted to keep the budget at least reasonable. You obviously could throw Parallel parallel lives in here as well. It's just going to double up the tokens, so we double up the effects. If we have our Bone Shredder in our graveyard and we attack with our Gyrus and we create that token copy of it, we're going to create 2 token copies of it. So now we're going to get to destroy 2 non-artifact, non-black creatures. So we're just doubling up the effect that we already want to get. And then Doubling Season, of course, has the added bonus of if an effect would put 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it puts twice that many counters instead. So our Gyrus does come into play with +1/+1 counters. So now it's going to double those. So it's even better. That's why I put it in the deck over Parallel Lives. Really fun, interesting deck. Like I said, it's a deck I had before in the past, and I'm sitting here looking at this trying to figure out, why did I ever take this deck apart? Because it was really a fun, interesting deck. It's a super value-y deck with lots of ETBs, and I use a creature, get an ETB out of it, sacrifice it, get some bonus from sacrificing it, then I reuse it again, and just tons and tons of value. And I always love decks like that. So the deck list is in the description for this as well. Like I said, the Isao Enlightened Bushi deck list is going to be in there, and the Gyrus deck list. You get a bonus this time. Also in the description below, as usual, is the poll for the next video, and I'm really trying to keep those polls to underwhelming commanders. I've started realizing recently that I'm doing a lot of commanders that are unpopular, but I don't really consider them to be underwhelming. So I'm trying to stay a little bit away from commanders that I actually think are pretty good, like Gyrus, but are just unpopular for whatever reason, and try to concentrate more on commanders that are, yes, of course, unpopular, but more so underwhelming, and maybe people need help with what am I actually going to do with this commander. For me, that's where I think I can be the most help, is you have a commander where you're just like, what do I do with this? And I'm giving you ideas of what you can do with it. So go vote on those commanders, and we'll see what is in the next Underwhelming Commanders video. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.